What's up, introduction to journalism class. My name is Camden Stone. I'm accompanied here by Jagger Sargent, who is my roommate. We are from the same hometown. Jagger, tell us a little bit about yourself.
What's going on? Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Well, yeah, like you said, Jagger Sargent from the same hometown down in Manhattan Beach, California. And, me and Cam, we grew up together. Cam and I, we spent a lot of time back in middle school. We're acquaintances. Some say classmates. Other people say friends. It could go either way.
I think both.
I think both in a way. I think that's a great call. And, grew up in this town together. And we did part ways, though, a little bit in my transition to a private high school. So I guess we'll just kind of talk about that, maybe see where we can get, throw out some ideas of contrasts and comparisons when it comes to public versus private school and what that transition was like.
Yeah, so mainly I'm just going to be talking to Jagger about, we were both present at the same middle school, Manhattan Beach Middle School, also known as MBMS, located in Manhattan Beach, California. And the next step off of that, where everyone usually went, was Maricosta High School, which was the public high school in the area. I ended up going to Maricosta High School. Jagger here did not, and Jagger went to a very small high school, which he's going to go greater in depth on. But what we're pretty much going to be speaking about, or he will be speaking about, is sharing his experience for not going to that big high school, but maintaining those relationships through the big high school, and kind of just that transition to this smaller high school, and then maybe even the transition from that small of a high school to a college like TCU and a size and that.
Yeah, and I think, to start it off, I guess I'll just bring it back to the basics, bring it back to square one. Pacific Elementary School, pretty big, predominantly white elementary school in our area. Started with that, and following my brother and sister's path. They were both older than me. Followed them into what Cam was talking about, MBMS, Manhattan Beach Middle School. And through then, it was, same predominantly white area. So it was a predominantly white high school with little diversity. And, it was a fun time, definitely. But through high school, I decided to make my transition back in 2020 to what's called Vistamar High School. And this school made up a class of 63 by the time I graduated my senior year. So super small, as Cam was saying, coming from a middle school with 200, 300,
300, 400 around kids at our local middle school.
In our
class,
local
elementaries too. It would filter in.
Yeah, so huge middle school. And through that time period, there was a lot that I noticed from the comparison to a public middle school classroom into a private high school classroom. And those class sizes varied in my high school from maybe 8 to 14 kids compared to the Manhattan Beach Middle School, maybe 30 to 40 kids. How many kids were in your average classes down at MBMS?
At MBMS, I would say around 25, 30 kids around there, maybe a little more at MBMS. But it got greater as the years went. It was weird for MBMS because MBMS had a smaller amount of teachers for every subject as you increasingly made your way up the totem pole through MBMS. So I remember 8th grade, the year before we graduated, there was only 2 science teachers. So and science was one of those subjects that you had to take. So that was one of my bigger classes that I had, but I remember 6th grade, small classes.
Yeah, so making that transition, obviously we were in the pandemic, COVID era, which did change a lot, making a transition into a brand new high school. And my guess is a lot of other people have had the similar experience, especially during COVID, where you're transitioning into high school with basically no one from that high school. And, this transition was obviously scary. And through this, I made a goal at the start to try to maintain a lot of the relationships I made back in middle school and stretch those out all through high school. And starting back in 2020, when we first started online, obviously, I don't think I talked to a single kid from my high school until about 3/4 of freshman year through, where I actually reached out to one of them, ended up becoming one of my best friends. So, going to such a small school, I kind of realized from the get-go that, all these kids I was talking to,
Yeah.
everything, with a class size like 63, I knew that these kids would be my tightest and closest friends because there was such a small school to choose from. It's not like when you go to TCU, you don't know who your friends are going to be. You see a different kid every time you walk down the hall. Completely different experience when you go to an all-indoor school, about 3 hallways big, maybe 15 classrooms, even less, small teacher pool, and a small student pool. So that transition kind of started off rough, especially during that COVID era. But, I think it's just interesting to acknowledge the fact that going from a class size of 400 to about, 63, you see a lot of differences in the types of students as well that attend such a private high school, and students that just go on the regular course, which was to the Maricosta, the high school that you attended there. So I think starting off, with the students, it was a lot more diverse than where I was coming from. Diversity rate, about 40% white students, and then 60% made up a different pool of races and ethnicities, which was super cool to see a lot of kids from different backgrounds, which I haven't experienced up until that point. I was used to the same kids from the same area in the same hometown down in Manhattan Beach, California, no one really outside our zip code. And
that's what Costa was. Costa didn't have any of that differential through the backgrounds. It was more just primarily white, beach town. You don't really see much diversity throughout Maricosta. And it was kind of like everyone who was in that town would filter throughout those Manhattan Beach school systems and end up at Maricosta. But there was some, which was, good obviously, but I know there was a lot more diversity at Vista.
Yeah. And I think especially in our area, like predominantly wealthy kind of spot, I saw a lot of differences when it came to income and people coming from areas that weren't necessarily safe and weren't considered nice, and shared a lot about their experiences coming from that, and that really opened up my perspective, which I think that's kind of one of the points I'll draw back to a few times in this interview, is the change of perspective I got through 4 years at Vistamar compared to what I think I would have gotten at a public high school such as Maricosta, where my older brother, my older sister 2 years older, brother 4 years older, they continued down the path of Maricosta, where most of the families put their kids after middle school. And going to a private high school, the tuition was definitely not friendly. And this also did open up a lot of opportunity for scholarships for a lot of the students from different zip codes, which definitely drew in a lot of different kids, different personalities. And those personalities, I think, are what stood out to me the most about my experience. And I think it's just really interesting because this is something that a lot of people don't realize. I see a lot of students, especially at TCU, who went fully through with that public school route or fully through with that private school route. I didn't see a lot of differentials when it came to transferring into public to private, back to public, or private, public, back to private. A lot of the kids, they know it, they understand what they're with, and they kind of like sticking with that. And after freshman year, once I finally was able to develop some relationships going into sophomore year, I started meeting a lot of the students, and the more I got to know them, it was just super interesting because the area we lived in was, some consider a bubble.
Yeah, the bubble. That's what they called it.
That's what they called it.
Yeah.
Back home, the bubble. But through Vistamar, I was able to escape this and see a lot of those diverse perspectives. Bringing it back to one of my good friends, Jonas Black, right? He shared a lot of the economic struggles growing up with me, and a lot of the things that, how he saw me, which was one of the big things, just putting myself in someone else's shoes and seeing from their perspective and how they grew up and, how they were looking forward to every meal on the table. And it gave me a sense of appreciation early on, especially, sophomore, junior year, when, it's a big time where you're growing up, you're learning, you're developing, you're not fully cognitively developed and everything. Your frontal lobe still going through those stages. So it's a big time for, finding who you are, finding what you like, finding your interests, finding, what you want to do with your life. And obviously that question still remains unknown for a lot of people. But going to a school so small, I think you get to see a lot, it's a lot.
Yeah, can I jump on one thing real quick? So we're talking about interests, finding what you want to do. One thing that I found was pretty interesting throughout your experience and many others going to Vista is through the sporting aspect. Going to a little high school like that, you don't have the big classic high school football teams, the big baseball teams,
Yeah.
the big soccer, whatever it is, those big sporting teams that are categorized with a lot of, local high schools around the United States. So I know you chose the flag football route, and no hate to flag football, but it's something different. I know you didn't have the opportunity to play in a football league or tackle football league. So how was that experience through flag football a little different compared to being on like a bigger tackling football team through a local big high school like Maricosis? Like, what were some things that you thought was cool, some takeaways from that, and maybe some people you met?
Yeah, exactly. So when I think about the sports aspect, that's just one thing that I think really brought a community together at such a small school. Obviously, it does at all schools. Like, I would still go to these public football games and watch and, maybe take some routes down for my flag football plays, running posts.
Take some notes.
Take some notes, maybe get some game footage and all.
Yeah.
And this was the one thing that I think a lot of students at small schools can acknowledge, that although, you may be Division 7, which I didn't even know existed until I reached Vista Mar, Division 7, Division 9, all these high-end divisions. When you think about that, you think, oh man, like, what am I doing? Why even play sports? But one of the cool things is coming in, never caught a football in my life, never threw a pass. And flag football, it kind of stood out to me. Heard a lot of great things from the upperclassmen, one of which who actually attends TCU, named Robbie Bennett, continuing flag football within TCU, intramural legend actually.
Yeah.
He was the one who kind of said, hey, do this. No, it sounds stupid, but trust me, it'll be the time of your life. And, coming in sophomore year, didn't have sports freshman year, unfortunately. That was where I built all my tightest relationships. It came from those kids like Finwell, Jonas, Sage, Lucas, all these names, all these people that I never would see myself in a friend group with, because I knew a few of them coming in and didn't have any relationship with them. I didn't have many thoughts about them. I just have never met them before. And I think that's one of the cool things, is you get this alternate reality basically where you're making relationships with these people you never think you would get along with, and all of a sudden you're calling them your closest buddies. And specifically in flag football, you start off not too many kids on the team at such a small school. If you're someone athletic, you're going to be the best player on the team. If you don't know how to play, the great thing about a place like Vistamar, you could just hop on the team. All of a sudden, you're on the starting roster. And a lot of these kids coming into private school, what I heard a lot about their transitions is I like to know why people chose the route of Vistamar. For me in particular, it was more along the lines of, academics. Coming from a school like Manhattan Beach Middle School, big class sizes. I had a lot of trouble focusing, got me into some trouble with, talking too much and not being able to lock in on school, lock in on academics, which had a drawback on grades. And, I think my parents kind of realized that maybe big class sizes weren't the thing for me, and I needed a place where I can sit up front, be forced to lock in basically when I don't have people around me. Because when you got a teacher walking around the class with 10 kids, if you're talking on your phone, distracted, not being able to focus, they're going to know, and they're going to call you out on that. And, I'm just curious, what was it like at Costa being in, these large classes?
There was a big gap of care between private school teachers and Maricosta teachers. I've had some rough experience with Maricosta teachers. My film and television teacher was actually arrested. He was a pedophile. So that happened junior year.
Sad. No,
not sad. He was a terrible guy. He did not like students at all.
Sad about the pedophile thing.
That's it's not ideal.
No.
And one of my psychology teachers. I hate to just come here. I don't want to throw out his name, but he was very, he despised kids. He was not.
Lack of empathy.
Yeah, no, he did not want to work with kids, and he was yet there educating kids on the basics of psychology. And then we had a couple other issues with teachers, which has been a reoccurring thing at Coast. That the teachers don't really have that passion. And, one thing I think that's biggest for a teacher is you should want to be there. And you could really tell as a student, which is not a great look at all, that they didn't want to be there. And then not only did they not want to be there, but they weren't looking to go out of their way and help you. There were obviously some gems. Mr. Brown, 10th grade English class, massive shout out to Mr. Brown. One of the nicest guys I've ever met. I've made sure, I'm the oldest of 4, I made sure my 3 younger siblings all had the chance to witness Mr. Brown and the magic that he performs in that classroom.
Yes.
Great guy, knows how to teach a class, driven with passion. And the one thing that he spoke about many times and made very clear was it's not about the money, which was pretty obvious too. But yeah, one thing I wanted to ask you about, just rewinding to that Robbie topic real quick before we drift away from the sporting aspects that we were talking about. But you spoke with me a little bit about that bond between you and Robbie, how you went on and you were just the snapper and Robbie was the wide receiver one. Can you tell them a little bit about what you told me about your bond with Robbie and how that kind of grew to how it is now?
Of course, yeah. So, Robbie, upperclassman, kind of took me under his wing.
Yeah.
And from the get-go, he told me that he saw a lot of himself in me. He had a similar transition coming from one of the primary elementary schools in our area, going to Manhattan Beach Middle School, and then making the transition for similar reasons to Vista Mar. And his older sister, he had a older sister attend Maricosta, I'm pretty sure. So very similar situation, and I think that's where a lot of our bond was created. Is he saw me, this little sophomore, basically a freshman after skipping the freshman year for COVID, what it felt like. And because we had these shared lived experiences, that was one of the main things that really drew us together. And after his graduation, he came out to TCU. And I still stayed in contact with him. He always wanted to check in on flag football, see what the stats were looking like. And because he saw a lot of himself in me, I think that was definitely correlated with me seeing a lot of myself in him and what I wanted to be when I was older. And what I was able to take away from that was, maybe TCU was like one of the areas I really should look at.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big reasons I was led to here, because I had never really heard too much about the school until I came out, visited him, saw what it was like, saw the culture, saw the people. And although, it was definitely another transition back to a feel like Maricosta,
Yeah.
feel like Manhattan Beach Middle School, I think I had my private school time, I had my experience there, and I was ready to make my transition back into this world of a lot more self-responsibility when it came to in the classroom, outside of the classroom, and taking a lot of self-accountability.
Yeah. So one thing you briefly spoke on, and what I seem to think is the main drive that why you ended up at Vista Mar, was distractions in a way. Mm-hmm. So my question to you is, distraction-wise, did it work? Was it helpful? And how was it at Vista Mar with those small classes? And how did that also reflect on your social relationships that you developed through middle school?
So yeah, I think once I made that transition into Vista Mar in such small classes, I definitely took a couple of years to pull it together. And definitely in sophomore year, there were a few teachers. Dr. Q, for example, she was like one of my big mentors in high school. She kind of saw this side of me. She knew why I was at Vista Mar. I grew a great relationship with her. Ended up writing one of my letters of rec for TCU, which was a great thing because it ended up working out pretty well. But she was the one who kind of ran me through how to focus and how to turn a lot of the energy I put into talking in class to school and to academics, and kind of making a positive out of the negative, and seeing, yeah, I'm talkative, yeah, I always want to be doing something, especially can't sit there in lectures. So she was able to take this and tell me how to use my energy differently, and that was kind of the big drive for me to be able to regain focus and change kind of my sense of how I should be in a school environment. And maybe I should take notes, maybe I should do homework on a Friday night, you know? All these kind of things that my middle school self would never even think to do because I was just so focused on big school environment, being with all those people, surrounded by so many friends, and obviously when I would distract them, they would just distract me right back, and you know, we would kind of go back and forth with that, like playing some ping pong. So definitely helped out for sure.
Okay, yeah. Well, Jagger, we appreciate you coming out here today, giving us a little bit of the story, and hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. You know, it's always great to know a little bit more about your roommate, as much as we did know. But appreciate your time and appreciate your words of wisdom too.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely,
appreciate
brother.
it for sure.
Hey, to many more.
To many more. Cheers, brother. Go for